communicate regarding it. Alex Smith Wilkes, Executive Director of American Rising, also the former chairwoman of the College Republican National Committee, was the first female elected chair of the organization's 125-year history. In 2017, Alexandra Smith Wilkes was named as a co-recipient of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee Ally of the Year 2014. The list goes on. Let's welcome in Alexandra Smith Wilkes to the program. Welcome into the program, Alexandra.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure to have you. Let me just get your take here. A question I started my show a couple of hours ago was this. What do you think has happened? Do the American people see through what's happened the last several days, that you have a crazed man that's mailing bombs and the media immediately says, President Trump, this is your fault because this guy was your fan and he liked you, so therefore you're fanboy, you're responsible for him. And then you have a guy who hated President Trump and they say, President Trump, you're responsible for that also because you've been nice to Israel and that really pissed him off. I think Americans maybe see through this stuff of that it's the person who commits the crime that is responsible for their own actions, and this pretzelization to blame the president. Do you think it's going to work in the midterms? That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, I hope that for all of our sakes as Americans that this doesn't work to affect our midterm elections in either direction, because that is the point of terrorism, whether it's domestic or international, is to influence our behavior and to change the way that we do things here in America. And so, it would be a terrible shame if people did, let these incidents influence the way that they were going to vote, if they were going to vote, just because, we can't allow terrorists, whether they're homegrown or they're from abroad, to change the way that we do things. That being said, I think that, Americans tend to see these incidents as the result of the perpetrators rather than outside influences. I mean, look at Congressman Steve Scalise and the baseball field full of Republican congressmen and senators who were shot up at, not too long ago. And Steve Scalise, of course, sustained very serious injuries from that. Following that incident, you didn't hear Republicans blaming Nancy Pelosi or Bernie Sanders, for whom this guy was one time a volunteer. Instead, they chalked it up to a crazy person, a madman who was violent and unpredictable and did a bad thing. And so, I don't, like I said, I hope that for our sakes it doesn't influence the elections, but I also think that Americans are smart enough to see these incidents for what they are, which is just the result, the actions of terribly disturbed people.
You have the Kavanaugh hearing that seems like a long time ago, but I think in people's memory it wasn't that long ago. And there was a shift that happened. It's almost like the sleeping giant of Republicans or the Trump coalition woke back up and said, really, this is what America's become? Are you guys still feeling and sensing that there was a momentum shift after the Kavanaugh confirmation chaos that happened? Was it palatable there at RNC, and is it still is the residual of that still there?
I absolutely think that the Kavanaugh hearings marked a huge turning point in this election, because what we saw with the Kavanaugh hearings was the Republican base really get fired up again. Because, it wasn't just the fact that Democrats behaved disgracefully throughout the entire hearing, even before the accusations came out. And it wasn't even just the fact that the Democrats sat on the accusations until the last possible minute and abused this poor woman in terms of for their own political gain. I think that what really was at the root of Republicans' fear and anger at the hearings was this idea that in America we might be changing this presumption of innocence that we have, something that sets us apart from other legal systems throughout the world and makes ours unique, that we afford so many protections to the accused. So this idea that all of a sudden we were just going to do away with that protection and ruin a man's life, based, without any contemporaneous corroborating evidence, was very disturbing to people. So I think that the Kavanaugh hearings, it was a huge wake-up call to Republicans, particularly after sort of that summertime lull where people, might not be focused on the elections. All of a sudden, we're back in September. These shenanigans go on. Republicans are energized. And now I think that other incidents, whether it's the caravan or it's Democrats sort of saying ridiculous things like Eric Holder saying we're going to kick Republicans, or Hillary Clinton saying we're going to be civil after the elections. That's just that's adding fuel to the fire for Republicans who are going to go out and vote on Election Day.
Republicans, and I think Donald Trump was elected, he was very visible and very adamant that he was going to build a wall, border security, and suddenly we have this caravan coming up from Central America, and I think that the left immediately, and again the media, the propagandists, the Pravda of the modern day, decided to try to say, oh, look how mean we're going to be to these poor immigrants. And then you see these photos of this young men, it's not women and children. That story has really disappeared from the news media. They're wanting to talk about anything, and even the politicians in D.C. wanting to talk about anything except that caravan coming up across Mexico. I think that's an issue that the president is still strong on. I think he polls well on. I think most Americans understand that you can't have people just invading our southern border. You think that's the reason the story has disappeared, because it plays well for the president?
I think so. I think that this is also an area of public policy where Democrats have consistently underestimated the average American's view on this issue. I mean, this is a common sense issue. You have people who are marching towards our southern border who are declaring that they're going to break our laws, enter illegally, and they plan to breach the border regardless of what our leaders say or what the security situation is down there. That's an invasion. That's a national security issue. And so I think that the president is right to mobilize in the way that he has about it. And I think that the Democrats, they don't want to get drawn into talking about it, because anything that they're going to say is not going to comport with the demands of their liberal base, which truly, there is no coherent Democratic strategy on immigration. There hasn't been for years. You could really only conclude at a certain point that they just want open borders. And, so they can't say anything that's going to tick those people off. But at the same time, I think that they realize that this is bad news for them. And that's why we're not seeing as much of the coverage, and we're not seeing Democrats who are talking about it too much, because they're afraid that this is, I think rightfully so, that this is going to stir up a lot of passions before the election.
You're listening to the voice of Alex Smith Wilkes. She's former chairwoman of the College Republican National Committee, executive director of American Rising, and we have Alex on here for a few more moments. Alex, let me ask you, I go back to the press conference yesterday, or the daily briefing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders and the media, and she was quite emotional, and I don't blame her, at this fact of the president being blamed for the shooting at the synagogue, as if he somehow programmed this guy to go do it. I want to come back. It's kind of where I first started off here. The president doesn't back down. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she lashed right back at the media and said, your first response here was to blame the president. His first response was to condemn the violence and call for call for civility and stop the anti-Semitism. It really is amazing just to watch the vitriol of the American media just in how they questioned Sarah Huckabee Sanders yesterday. And it's no wonder that the media has such low approval ratings right now.
Yeah, I think that the response that we saw was absurd. This is an absolutely despicable act of violence. It was motivated by hatred. It was directed at people who were just trying to practice their religion. And I think that to say that the president has not been a friend to the Jewish people or to the state of Israel really, sort of ignores a lot of what's been done over the last couple of months with his administration. I think it ignores the fact that he has Jewish family members himself, in terms of his daughter and his son-in-law and his grandchildren. And so to say that the president was the driving force for the anti-Semitism that drove this killer to go out and murder these people, I think is just way off base, and it's just it's not something I think that people will see through that.
Do you have any predictions? Are we going to wake up next Wednesday morning, a week from tomorrow, and have Speaker of the House-elect Nancy Pelosi? I hope to God not. What's the confidence level there in D.C.?
I certainly hope. I hope not too. I think that at this point it's too close to call because, of course, the generic ballot tells us one thing, but then if you get into these battleground district polls, those are really tight. They're tied in some cases within the margin of error in others, and I think that it's difficult to say, one way or the other what's going to happen. And of course, we know from 2016 that was a completely unconventional year with an unconventional candidate. So the conventional wisdom for the following midterm elections may not apply.
Yeah.
And I do think on the Senate side that we will pick up Senate seats.
Yeah. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you here. I thank you for taking the time to be on the program. Alex Smith Wilkes on the program with me, and again, talking about the midterm election. Alex, thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
You got it. Alex Smith Wilkes.